A lot of very smart people have difficulty talking about what they do. Even people who can talk at length about highly complex machinations of the current business world find it hard to tell regular people what they do. This situation, though backward or awkward, may be somewhat laughable at dinner parties. However, it takes on a very different tenor when it's jobs on the line. And when you're responsible for ensuring that everyone in your company is on the same page. If you've ever been in this situation, then you'll enjoy what Amy Smith has to say. Amy is a business coach, leadership development consultant, and StoryBrand Workshop Facilitator. Amy, welcome to the Subscription Maker Impact.
Hi, Zachary. Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Let's make sure we're all on the same page.
Mhm.
What do you do for your clients?
Yes, I serve clients in three ways: coaching, training, and consulting. And I'm very fortunate. I've had a really great, so many different experiences, worked with some great companies throughout my career. So now I love to take all of that and really help and serve folks. So I'm really on a mission to help equip leaders with profitable strategies that will help unlock their professional development and transform their lives for lasting growth and success. So that's really what I do. I get to work with some amazing folks.
So I guess I want to kind of get a little granular and kind of go
Yeah.
down, apologize. I don't want to go too far and down the rabbit hole, but how difficult is it to help people find the right words to describe how they help their clients?
Yes, it is for so many people. It's unbelievably difficult, but it doesn't have to be. And I think what's really happening for folks is the real difficulty is that people, when they talk about what they do, there's two mistakes people usually do. And this is where the difficulty comes in, right? So oftentimes when people are trying to describe what they do, the first mistake they make is they use insider language, right? So they're using some buzzwords or insider language or complex words. And what's happening is as they're talking about it, people are getting distracted because they're burning too many calories trying to figure out what the words mean or what's the insider language, and it's very distracting. So that's where one of the elements of difficulty comes in. And then the second thing that I find people often do that causes some sort of friction there is that when I talk about what I do, people are often positioning themselves as what I call, or in StoryBrand terms, is what we call the hero instead of the guide. Right. So people will talk about what they do in a way that makes them the hero of the story, like what they do, how awesome they are. And it really becomes all about them. And people aren't really interested in that. What they really are interested in is the what we call the guide. And what people the mistake people are making is not talking about how they actually what problem they help people solve and how they help make other people's lives better. So when people are finding it difficult to talk about what they do, it's because they're kind of usually making those two mistakes. And it doesn't have to be that hard. It can be really simple and formulaic when you talk about what you do.
Okay, so I have this problem myself
Okay.
because I come from like a SaaS background,
Hmm.
service as software as a service,
Yep.
and one of the things we often deal with is we're told create new categories.
Hmm.
Don't rely on what's come before because then you have to compete with the incumbents. you know so we have to create these new categories, which then starts us down this path of using highly esoteric language.
Yes.
So how do you help someone like that, someone
Yeah.
like me?
Yes. Well, it's again, I'm going to kind of break it down. In a sort of a simple way, I think, in that it's all about what I call having a clear view of success, right? It's this quote, I'm reminded by this quote by Lewis Carroll: if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. I think so often we overthink or we're overcomplicating situations or these categories or what we want to achieve. And again, it doesn't have to kind of be that way. Just like using insider language, if we used simple everyday language, we could communicate in a way that was clear and easy to understand. If we talk about wanting to help people who are creating these new categories, it's really about helping them get clear on the idea. Like, what are you trying to solve? Like, it's these three things. It's what problem are you trying to solve, right? So, what will your product or service do? Like, how are you going to help people overcome a problem? The second is, how are you going to work with people? Like, how will the customer be able to get it or how will they use it? And then the third one is, how is their life going to be better if they use that product or service? So it's really, those to me are kind of the some of those three main attributes of defining this clear view of success. So if you want to go down this sort of uncharted path and forge, into some new territory, there is some work that you need to do. You got to get really clear about, where you're headed. What's that clear view of success? And so again, it's, what problem are you solving? Because I think so many people are not clear about the problem they're solving. They just get excited about an idea, but we've got to pause and get clear and say, what problem am I helping? What's the friction in somebody's life? What problem am I helping them overcome? And how is my product or service going to help people overcome that problem? And then how are we going to work together, right? If I'm going to go venture out in this new category, like, are we going to work together virtually? Is it a service? Is it a product? What does that look like? And then the last piece is, if we do those things, what is the success, or how will people's lives be better? How will they be changed for the better using this? So, I always like to remind people too, when you're thinking about this, kind of doing some of this work in the beginning, that remember, people only want to buy a solution to their problems, right? So when we think about this, you're creating this new category, and it's not that people want to come and buy your product, they actually want to buy the solution to the problem that they're facing. I like to think about it like this. Nobody wakes up in the morning and decides they want coaching. They're not like, oh, I need to be coached. What they really want is, they need help to build a profitable business. They need help to get more leads for their business, or they want to learn a new skill. Like, how do I engage in productive conflict? Or how do I do this thing? So that's something to really keep in mind for folks. So when, again, like when we're thinking about, when you're creating these new categories, you got to get a clear view of success, and then always keep in mind that people are buying a solution to the problem. They're not actually buying your product. They want to buy that solution. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Okay, so you've done the work and you figured out what the solution you're trying to
Yep.
deliver. What kind of time frame are we looking at? Once we start down this path and we arrive at a point where we're saying, okay, that's where I want to
Mhm.
be. What kind of time frame are we looking at?
Yeah, I think that depends. And one of the things that that's going to depend on is sort of what's your priority. Oftentimes, I find entrepreneurs or solopreneurs, even in business leaders, they have this struggle of what I call progress over perfection. Like, what's your priority? Is it, I need to get to market really quickly? So, am I valuing speed, or is it quality, right? Do I really want to take the time and build something amazing? And so I think it's navigating and finding the balance of progress versus perfection, right? And so oftentimes my advice when I sort of coach or consult with people, it's, let's figure out how to launch something. It doesn't have to be 100%. You can launch a product or service or a new category at 75 or 80%, as long as you build in a continuous improvement process or plan. And so it's really helping people. So oftentimes people will elongate that time frame because the product's just not right, or I want to do one more thing, or I've got one more question. And you can find all kinds of reasons to not launch or to not go to market with something. So it's really going to have to manage that. And just sometimes you just got to get it out there, but then also make sure you've installed a plan for continuous improvement. So when you're looking at a time frame, one of the things I often do, in fact, I just did this with a client recently, is they want to launch this sort of online program and course. And she was all ready to go and she has all the ideas and all the, everything she wants to do. And I said, okay, when do you want to launch? And it was very arbitrary. She says, I think I want to launch in September. Um, Great. So let's reverse engineer that. So this is also what I do to help people build a time frame. And once she did that, it opened up, there was a lot of light bulbs that went an aha. So you pick a date and then you work backwards and you think about all the things that need to happen and you work backwards. And then when you do that, you're going to discover a couple of things. Either the time frame works and you've got enough time to do all the things, or you don't have enough time. You're going to realize, oh my gosh, it's May. I want to launch in September and there's too much work to do. So then you have to decide what product will you launch in September. If your launch date is fixed, then you have to adjust what product or service you're going to launch at that point in time. So I think it's constantly navigating and trying to figure out what's going to be the ideal timeline. Again, progress versus perfection. But also when you choose your timeline or oftentimes there are other pieces. I like to, like I said, work backwards and reverse engineer. You can move as fast as slow as you want. But again, having a clear idea of like, what are your outcomes and your deliverables? Does that help?
It does. I do want to kind of shift just a little bit of
Yeah.
along that axis.
Okay.
So here's where I'm coming from. So when you work for a company, when you're an employee, you talk about how long will it take? How long will it take to complete this
Yeah.
task? But when you're a consultant,
Hmm.
it's how long will it be before I see some change?
Yeah.
So it's that initial change. You don't have to reach the whole, you don't have to get to the end game, but you got to see
Mhm.
something. So how long does that take?
Yeah. Well, that's again in the beginning. I think that's part of the work you do in the beginning where you establish realistic milestones and you get agreement, right? And you say, okay, what's the first, as if we're doing when I do consulting work, it's like I get agreement. I said these will be some of our milestones. And then keeping in mind behavior, if you're looking to see change in behavior, that's going to take a little bit of time. But if we're installing a program or a process or we're doing something, again, I think you have to set realistic, clear milestones and check-in points along the way. And so how long does that take? Well, I think it depends what you're trying to accomplish. So one of the things I always, I think is so important, especially when you're in the coaching and consulting space, it's going to be having the communication and clarity with the client, right? And making sure that you both are aligned when it comes to sort of expectations or deliverables, outcomes, and the time frame, right? And what I'm always thinking about is, we're serving the client. So, if the client wants something, they want a time frame, and it's how do we deliver on what they want? So, if that is that more kind of what you were looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. What I was
Okay.
getting at is that as a consultant, you go in, as a coach, you go in and there's what you were expecting to see.
Yes.
Okay, this is what the client told me was their problem. This is how this is the setup. You
Hmm.
get there, and I used to go into clients, and it was like, okay, we've got 6 months, we got a year, we're going to work on this thing. And it's like,
Yeah.
if you think I'm going to sit here for 6 months before I'm going to show you something, you're high.
Yeah.
I'm like, in 2 weeks, I'm going to have something for you. I'm going to
Yes.
give you an assessment. I'm going to let you know this is what we agreed on, but you may want to look over here. You may
Yes.
want to, because what I found is that we, I'm going to do what you want me to do. But I'm
Hmm.
telling you that what I'm hearing on the ground when I talk to your
Yes.
people, it doesn't match.
Yes.
And you tell me, do you want me to go with what I'm seeing, or do you? But I'm gonna lay it out and hand it to you in 2 weeks, so that I've done something to
Yes.
guarantee that to basically prove that I this is the reason you brought me in. Not
Yes.
just to basically gild the lily and do whatever but to tell you the truth because you may
Yes.
not get it somewhere else.
Yes. 100%. And I think one thing I always like to do when it's like a coaching engagement or, that I in the beginning, there's always some sort of assessment. Like there's a needs assessment. So if it's going to be more of a consulting sort of project, we'll do a needs assessment so we can establish a baseline of sort of where we are today. If it's coaching, oftentimes I'd like to use some sort of an assessment. So it could be DISC or it could be Myers Briggs or, any one of those assessments, some kind of an assessment so you can, again, benchmark people's progress. So, like, where did we start? And then we can track progress along the way. But I agree with you. I think, if you want to say a 2 weeks sounds like a great time frame because it's enough to get a little bit of something done. Um, but also, for the client, the clock is ticking. There's something that I'm sure you're familiar in the SaaS world. There's something called time to value. When we think about customer success and what our customers are thinking and feeling once they've made an investment, is once a customer has paid money or signed the contract, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. They want to see results. And one of those measurements, we call it time to value. And so what that means is how long will it take for the customer to feel like they've gotten the value of their money or their investment back? And so, when I've worked with, and especially just with that StoryBrand or with different clients, we really would measure time to value and we really put in a lot of emphasis on saying, okay, from the time somebody makes the assessment, the clock is ticking. How do we help them earn that investment back? So I think you could, if you want to have, depending on the client or the project, I agree with starting with something relatively soon. 30 days is too much. A week is probably too short. So somewhere in that 2 to 3 week range feels good, where you can give them some sort of update. And then also it's always making them aware of sort of what we want to accomplish and then what's really happening. And then I look at my role, and sometimes it's really hard, as a consultant or a coach. It's like I can see what's happening, and maybe things are going off the rails, or there's some problems brewing, or there's some other things that need to happen. But I can inform the client. I can make them aware of it. I can, provide a recommendation, but ultimately they're going to make the decision, right? But I always feel if I do my due diligence, advise them of what's going on, and then allow them to make that decision.
So, okay, I'm going to do something a little different. We're in the
Okay.
category, we're in the new categories today. So I'm going to do
Okay.
something a little different. So I'm going to
Okay.
give you a heads up.
All
I want
right.
to talk about managing our opportunities and opportunity
Yes.
management, which is
Okay.
big going forward. But
Yep.
how I get there is we got to start with you moved 30 times after
Yes.
college. How did that happen?
Um, I just kept saying yes. They were all work related. It was for opportunities. And it was great. It was the opportunities presented themselves. I looked for them and they presented, but every time once I, finished college, I moved, I moved with a company. I went to school at the University of Florida in Gainesville. But then I ended up in Atlanta and I was working with a company, and this was a growing startup and they were opening locations. And, they said, do you want to go and, go to Boston? And yes, the answer was yes. And then there was an opportunity to go to LA, and the answer was yes. And it was a yes that moved me forward. So, eventually I was with Apple and they gave me the opportunity. I started, um, with Apple when retail was new and they were opening up stores, and I started in the Chicago area. But within 9 months, my dream job appeared internally, was posted, and I applied to that, and I moved out to Cupertino. And the moving really came. It was just I truly valued the experience. I really just wanted to keep learning and getting experience and just saying yes. So that's how all the moving happened, and everything. I'm very grateful. I will also share with you that I think growth in your career um, is not always linear. I think oftentimes it is a zigzag. And so that is how I would also describe my career path is I really value the experience and the opportunity over the title and the promotion.
Okay, so there's one more we got to talk about. How did
Yeah.
you get to Nashville and StoryBrand?
Yes. Yes. So let's see. Back in, oh gosh, it was back in 2013. I was in Chicago. Um, So I'll just share with you all these 30 moves were not necessarily small moves. I have lived all over the country. I feel like 6 or 7 states. I've lived in Canada for a few years. So I've kind of, they were big moves that I made. But I actually had been in Toronto working with Apple, opening, training new store teams, growing that market. It was such a fast growing market. And then I came back to Chicago and it was 2013. I'd been there for 10 years. I had done so much, but I was ready for something different. And so I decided to do a big shift. I decided to leave Apple and start my own coaching and consulting business. And that took me back to Florida. And so the reason I share that with you is there was somebody that I stayed in touch with along the way that we worked together at Apple. He was actually on my team, and his name's Tim Schur. But Tim had, before I left Apple, he left and he had moved to Nashville and met Donald Miller, and they started StoryBrand. They actually started a company called Storyline, which then became StoryBrand. But Tim and I stayed in touch. By the way, I will tell you, relationships are key. Are probably one of the most important thing I will tell you in your career. But Tim, when StoryBrand was sort of growing and the brand was getting some traction, they started doing workshops, and he asked me if I would like to be one of their workshop facilitators. So I said yes, because what a fun opportunity. They were, really geared towards helping small business owners to clarify their messaging, to start, to help them grow and build a thriving, profitable business. This sounded perfect. And facilitation training is one of the things I love to do. So that was an easy yes. So I started working. Gosh, I did workshops all over the world with StoryBrand. And then the pandemic hit. And luckily, at the same time in 2020, StoryBrand was getting ready to launch a new product that was a business coach certification. So they invited me to kind of come on board full time and to help build and launch that program. And so that brought me to Nashville. And here we are.
Okay, so after this whirlwind tour of the country, now we
Yeah.
come to the real question.
Yes.
I mean, starting at the beginning, I jumped
Mhm.
on AI with Jasper, and
Okay.
I have moved across many different AI platforms. And one of
Hmm.
the things that's caused me to make these moves is opportunity.
Hmm.
There are opportunities just coming out of the woodwork. So, how do you manage opportunity, and what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs who are looking to really manage their opportunities and understand that you're going to be flooded with things,
Hmm.
and you really got to take an interest in what opportunities you have and where they're going to take you?
Yeah, um I think there's really three things I would share with folks. So there's this one that I really love. Um it's this idea, I have a lot of friends that take improv classes or have worked at improv. And so I've sort of been fascinated. I'm so close. I haven't started taking improv yet, but I think I'm just about ready to sign up. But one of the first lessons that they teach you in improv is this idea of yes and, right? And yes and is so important because what it does is the idea of yes and it allows for creativity and collaboration. It keeps the dialogue going. So when you're talking about this, what I'm thinking about is so often people, they will hear an idea or there's a new, you think about AI or how to use it or what's going on. And oftentimes, if people don't quite understand or they're, have a little trepidation or whatever, there might be a tendency to sort of like say no, right? Or be like, I'm not interested, or this doesn't make sense, or it's not for me. But what if instead you adopted what I call the yes and approach, sort of that learner mindset, if you will? And so, yes and doesn't mean I accept the idea or AI as it is today or as the only solution. It means I want to keep the conversation going. Let's keep talking about what's possible. So, I think, some of the advice that I would give to people really would be to have that learner mindset, to sort of employ the concept of yes and, to be like yes and what does this make possible, yes and, because oftentimes that dialogue and that conversation and that collaboration will get you to a better place. It'll get you to what I think are win-win solutions. I often think so often that people come in and traditionally have this idea of a win lose, right? Like I'm either going to get what I want or I'm not going to get. I'm either going to get the customer or I'm not going to get the customer. I'm going to get the promotion or not get the promotion. But instead, if we had what I like to call win win, we looked for win win solutions or that win win mentality. It doesn't always have to be everything or nothing, right? So, yes, and allows for the continued dialogue to have a conversation and to find a solution, or opportunity or use AI in a way that can really benefit everyone.
Yeah, I've got kind of a slightly different concern. What I
Okay.
have found is that people will fight tooth and nail to hang on to an opportunity that's past its prime.
Yeah.
It just has gone away. There's no longer a market for what was.
Yep.
So what I think about is when I one of the some of the best advice I ever got was I was out in Silicon Valley for the first time, and I was out at a conference, and someone pulled me aside and he said, "What kind of projects have you got on you?" I said, "I beg
Hmm.
your pardon?" He said, "So when you're out here, you always got to have a project in your back pocket because
Hmm.
you never know when somebody's going to say, 'Hey, I got a little money. What do you think?'"
Yep.
And that's what I think of in AI. It's like somebody's got a little time, something comes up and it rings a bell for you. And it's like, you
Hmm.
got to think, okay, this may not be going anywhere, what I'm doing now. And I got to be concerned. I got to actually be on the lookout for what's next. What do you think?
Hmm. Yes, I 100% agree with that idea. I think that's curiosity. I think it's always it's this curiosity and then also this idea of what we call continuous improvement, right? I think if what is it? George Land has his theory, his growth theory. It's like if you stand still and you're unwilling to change, unfortunately, you're going to go the way of like Kodak or Xerox, right? You're eventually going to be um if you don't choose to evolve or choose to grow, then eventually you're going to be left behind, right? And so what if instead you chose, like, again, a growth mindset or this learner mindset, and instead of going, well, what is possible, what does this make possible, and get curious. I will tell you, here's a kind of a fun story. It's I think about my time at Apple, and what was so fascinating to me is, I think Apple was one of the first companies to introduce mobile sort of checkout, like that handheld checkout. Like before Apple, did this, we used to stand in line at cash registers all the time. We would go into a store, we would find what we want, and then we'd go and stand in line to pay for our product. And yet Apple had the idea, said, what if you didn't have to go stand in another line? What if we could just complete your transaction right here on the floor where you are? Just really make a great experience for the customer, but also make it just easier and more efficient. And it was like, why wouldn't we do that? And what's really fun about that is where that idea came from, right? Like what I loved about that is if you remember back in the day when you used to rent, go to car rental places, um, now when you go to a car rental place, like you go to return your car, you stand there, the person comes up, they check the car out, and then on their little hip they print out the receipt. They made sort of like that checkout mobile. So that was a place where that idea for if we could do this for car rental, why couldn't we like make the whole POS experience mobile and create that? So I think those were the early beginnings. So what I'm saying, kind of like sometimes be curious, scan your environment. Sometimes you can find really interesting solutions in unexpected places, right? And so I think it's this idea of, yes, have the ideas, be curious, think about what's possible. Don't be tied to just one dream or one idea. Like, be willing to like have that idea, be willing to let that idea breathe and grow, and maybe it's a starting point for something and it can really become something even better or more valuable.
So, Amy, what does
Yes.
impact mean to you?
Yes. Um I I think impact, when I sit in the coaching and consulting space, it's really about making a difference or doing the things that we would say we're going to do, right? So when I think about impact, it's achieving those specific measurable outcomes, right? Um, it's what are the measurable, observable changes that are happening as a result of the coaching or consulting process. So that's what I think about impact. Did we move the needle? Did we, you know, achieve what we set out to do? um did we, how close did we get? What did we learn from the process? Sometimes impact is also learning about what didn't work. What were the lessons learned? What am I going to do differently next time? Right. And so that's what I think about impact. It's what are the changes or the changes that we can observe? What can we measure? Also, what did we learn?
So, whenever I think about impact,
Hmm.
I think about uh, I think about podcasters actually,
Yeah.
and I think podcasters are this generation's fire givers, and our
Hmm.
guests are the catalysts that fan the flames.
Okay.
So, as a catalyst and guest fire giver,
Yes.
what are you most passionate about, and what tools do you want to hand down to the next generation to advance your passion?
Yes. Um, I will tell you what I'm most passionate about is helping this next generation of leaders, right? I think about Zachary, there's fascinating. Gallup released a study last fall that shared that over 50% of leaders, managers, leaders are reporting, self reporting, that they don't feel like they have the skills they need to be exceptional at their job. And then there was another study that I came across as well that said a little over 50% of people were leaders were reporting that they didn't feel like they also didn't feel like they had the skills to grow with the company or the business. And that's kind of alarming. And so what I'm really passionate about is sort of this idea of paying it forward. It's like, how can I serve and help these next generations of leaders? I've had been very fortunate and had a really amazing career and great experiences. So, what can I distill from all of my experiences in a way that can help others, employ these strategies for lasting growth and success? So, if I had to hand down, so that's kind of what my mission is and what I'm passionate about. But if I had to leave people with just maybe, if I can, just three three simple tools or sort of words of advice that will cost you nothing to start doing and can have massive change. The first one is if you want to encourage collaboration and creativity in your work or in your life, start using the phrase yes and. It's that phrase from improv. Like keep the conversation going instead of saying no or negating things or shutting it down. Be open to the conversation. So that's the first thing. Encourage collaboration and creativity by using yes and. Um, the other piece of advice, and I love this one, is if you want help navigating conflict and to encourage curiosity, because so many people don't want to engage in conflict, right? They have this fight or flight instinct, but actually, we can engage in healthy, productive conflict. And one of my favorite phrases to do that, if somebody says something and I'm like, I don't agree, I don't understand, I usually will start my response with something like, I'm curious, right? I use the phrase, I'm curious why you might say that, or I'm curious how you think we're going to be able to do that. When you use the words, I'm curious, it really de escalates any potential tension, but it also sets the stage for conversation, right? So you want to better navigate conflict or curiosity, use I'm curious. And then the last thing, and I love, love, love this one. At the end of a meeting or a networking conversation, start asking the question right at the end. So you're meeting with somebody, you've had the conversation before you finally say goodbye. There's one question I would encourage and sort of challenge you to start using and to ask, and it's, what can I do to help you? Yeah, there's this idea of the 5 minute favor. It's this idea of like offering to be of help or of service to somebody else. Every time I learned how to do that, Adam Grant talks about that. But I have to tell you, it changes. It's a game changer in the conversation. And people, when you end a conversation on that positive note, sometimes people say, "Oh my gosh, I really appreciate that," because they appreciate your generosity. There's nothing I need, but thank you so much. Or sometimes they might say, "Actually, yes. Could you help me with an introduction?" And usually I'll just share with you, if the thing that I'm always willing to help somebody, and I will always make that offer, and I'll say yes. If it's going to take me 5 minutes or less, why not? Why not? Build up that credibility and sort of that gratitude in that relationship and sort of invest in that relationship. So those are my three pieces of advice for folks. And it's really simple. Yes, and I'm curious, what can I do to help you?
Yeah, I'd like to also add Teresa Torres is she she does product management and
Okay.
our product development, and I come from a productized services world. So
Hmm.
her thing is that when you do discovery, you're out talking to your customers and you're trying to figure out what they want and what to build next, that you
Hmm.
you have a team of three. She calls it the trio. So
Okay.
your team of three, and everybody looks at it. But what's different is you don't sit there and say, okay, we'll compromise on what we
Hmm.
want to do. No, you don't
Hmm.
compromise. What you do is you say, okay, everybody present their conclusion. And
Yep.
then we try to figure out what the differences are. So if you and I differ on something, we don't conflict. You tell me why you feel differently.
Hmm.
And now we've got a situation where we've got more options,
Yep.
and more options lead to better solutions.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I love that idea. That's fantastic.
So as we start to wrap up, Amy,
Hmm.
is there
Yes.
anything you wish more people would ask you?
Um, Gosh, I think, it's so funny, Zachary. I think it's the one thing. It's more. No, I think it's the recognizing. When I really thought about this question, when I think about it, it's just recognizing that, like everybody else, I'm not just one thing, right? I love that I can describe my career or my skills and experience like a Swiss Army knife, right? Every experience I have had has sort of like gifted me with some new experience. My time at StoryBrand, I really honed my skills and expertise when it comes to sales and marketing and messaging, right? And coaching small business leaders, really understanding that. Um, so I would say, the thing I wish people would ask me more about, it's like, hey, don't just assume I'm one thing. If you're looking for, advice or insight or coaching. It's like there's a lot of different topics I can help. My passions would be around leadership development.
So, is there anything
Yeah.
new on the horizon?
Oh my
Something you
gosh,
feel
I'm so glad you
comfortable
asked.
telling us
Yeah.
about?
Sure. Well, yes, I've been talking about some of these like some of these ideas that we've been talking about. So one of the things I did when I left StoryBrand earlier this year is I was like, I want to build a product that's going to help folks. And so a colleague of mine, um, we built something that's called Lead on Purpose. It's a coaching product, right? It's really designed for group coaching. It can be individual coaching. But what I'm really excited about is we identified the 7 mindset shifts that will help any leader at any level in the organization to be successful, because I don't know that people need a new framework or a new model or this or that. It's just sort of distilling down, 20 plus years of experience in things that are very, I would say it can be common knowledge, but it is not common practice. And so that's what I'm excited about is we're getting ready to sort of launch this product. So it's called Lead on Purpose, and gosh, more to come. But yeah, so that's what I'm excited about. That's on the horizon.
So, if someone wanted to follow you and basically figure out where you are with Lead on Purpose,
Yeah.
what's the best way to follow you on social media?
Yeah, I think right now, if you follow me on Instagram, you're just going to see pictures of my dog, my German Shepherd. But um, if you want to connect or learn more, I would say right now the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. And so you can find me at LinkedIn, and my username is Kudra Lobar. So I'll spell that for you. That's KUDRALOBAR. So it's linkedin.com/in/Kujalobar. Because you can also look up Amy Smith, but you know what? There's a lot of Amy Smiths out there. But yes, and so that's how you can find me. We're getting ready to launch our Lead on Purpose website. And so that is coming soon, but I will certainly make that sort of update and announcement on LinkedIn when we're ready.
Amy, thank you for
Yes.
joining us on the Subscription Maker Impact.
Thank you, Zachary. This was so fun, and I appreciate the time and the opportunity to kind of connect. And I loved your questions, and I really hope this brings some value and benefit to your audience.
I'm pretty sure it will.
Okay. Awesome.
Before we wrap,
Yes.
too many people work way too hard and earn too little from their businesses. You don't have to be one of them. And that's a wrap.